The strange kind of living that nobody noticed. You don't pack a bag, you don't slam a door. You don't block everyone you know or disappear into another city. You wake up in the same room, make the same coffee, walk the same street, answer the same people, and yet somehow you are no longer where you used to be. You left without going anywhere. It usually happens so quietly that you see yourself. Maybe one day someone says something that would have destroyed you a year ago, and you realize that you're not interested in defining yourself anymore. Not because you suddenly become stronger, not because you stopped caring. You just don't recognize argument as home anymore. That's a strange feeling, to realize that something once had power to ruin your entire day, and now it barely deserves 5 minutes of your attention. You might even feel guilty about it, because we are taught to measure change by what people can see. A new job, a new relationship, a new city, a new body, a new house. Something obvious enough that people can point at it and say, look how much you've changed. But some of the biggest changes in a person leave no evidence. There is no photograph of the moment you stopped needing someone's approval. No certificate for the day you finally understood your own worth. No notification telling you that you officially grew the version of yourself who tolerated things just to avoid being alone. There is simply a moment when you notice, I don't do that anymore. And you don't chase the conversation. You don't reread the message 12 times looking for hidden meaning. You don't turn someone's silence into a story about your value. You don't spend the night rehearsing what you should have said. You don't have to win every misunderstanding. And perhaps the most surprising part is that nothing dramatic happened. You simply became available for the things that used to consume you. That kind of growth can feel almost anticlimactic, because you expect transformation to feel like fireworks. Sometimes it feels like deleting a draft you no longer need. Sometimes it feels like sitting in your car for an extra 5 minutes because you suddenly realize you're okay. Sometimes it feels like hearing an old song and discovering the person who used to live inside those lyrics is no longer you. Sometimes it is just silence. And inside that silence, you realize you have been walking away from months, maybe years. You were leaving every time you choose not to respond. Every time you stop begging someone to understand. Every time you choose sleep instead of another argument. Every time you stop shrinking yourself to keep somebody comfortable. Every time you say that doesn't work for me anymore and didn't immediately apologize for having a boundary. You were leaving, you just didn't know where you were going yet. And that is one of the hardest part of changing. There is often a period where the old version of you has stopped fighting, but the new one hasn't arrived. You are somewhere in between, too awake to go back, too uncertain to know what comes next. You can feel lonely there because people who knew the old version of you may not understand the new one. Some will ask why you're different. Some will say you've become distant. Some will remind you of who you used to be, almost as if they were presenting evidence in a trial. You never used to be like this, and maybe they're right. You weren't. That's the point. You used to explain everything. You used to say yes when your whole body was saying no. You used to confuse being needed with being loved. You used to think keeping the peace meant swallowing your own. You used to believe that if you loved someone enough, eventually they would handle your heart carefully. You used to think being chosen by someone else was proof that you were worth choosing. But you know something now that you didn't know then. Some people can love you and still be wrong for you. Sometimes you can miss someone and still know you cannot go back. Sometimes forgiveness does not require access. Sometimes closure is nothing more than deciding you are finished, asking the past to explain itself. And sometimes the person you need to stop waiting for is yourself. The version of you who was going to become brave one day. The version who was going to live and things got really bad. The person who kept postponing their own life until everybody else was happy. Maybe that person deserves compassion, not hatred. Not embarrassment, compassion. because they were surviving with the tools they have. They made choices based on what they knew and stayed because living was frightening. They stayed because they hoped. They stayed because sometimes hope is the only thing you had left. But eventually you learned something hope alone cannot teach you. You can love what something meant to you and still admit that no longer belongs in your life. That realization can hurt, but it can also set you free. And freedom is often quieter than we imagine. It isn't always dancing in the rain or screaming, "I'm finally free." Sometimes freedom is incredibly boring. You go grocery shopping, you answer an email, you wash your dishes, you sleep through the night. And then, somewhere between brushing your teeth and deciding what to eat for dinner, you realize you haven't thought about them all day. You stop, you almost laugh. Because there was a time when you couldn't imagine surviving an hour without thinking about it. And now you forgot. Not because it never mattered, because it no longer owns you. That distinction matters. Healing doesn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes it means remembering without being pulled backward. You can remember the person you were without becoming them again. You can visit the old version of yourself without moving back in. You can look at your past and say, "I understand what you stayed, but I'm not staying there with you." That might be one of the most honest forms of growth. Not becoming recognizable to yourself. Because maybe the goal was never to become someone completely different. Maybe the goal was to return to the person underneath all the fear, people pleasing, disappointment, and noise. The person who existed before they learned to question every instinct, before they learned that love had to be earned, before they started measuring their worth by how useful they were to other people, before they confusing exhaustion with loyalty. Maybe growing isn't always adding something. Maybe sometimes it is subtraction. Less explaining, less chasing, less pretending, less proving, less access for people who repeatedly mishandle it, and less guilt for choosing yourself, and more room to think, room to breathe, room to become curious again. A room for a life that doesn't require you to abandon yourself just to maintain it. The beautiful thing is that nobody can really tell you when you've arrived. There is no finish line, there is no morning where you wake up and suddenly become healed, fearless, and completely certain. You still sometimes wonder whether you made the right decision, but something has shifted. You trust yourself a little more than you trust your fear. And that changes everything. Some things are worth coming back to. If these words give you any way to look at your own life, there is more where that came from. Subscribe.